President Gloria Arroyo is not necessarily pleased if you cite the dynastic principle to explain why she is president. After all, her father was the president of the Philippines and a very distinguished president. But that is possibly not the only reason why President Arroyo is where she is. There are other attributes. She has worked among the people across the board in various islands of this republic. She is a PhD in economics, no small matter. In fact, it is economics that is going to define her presidency. She is focusing a great deal on economic issues. And she is looking across the Southeast Asian region towards other parts of the world, including India. And we talked to her to get a clue as to what her vision might be to define the Philippines and its role in the world. Welcome to Worldview India, Madam President.
Thank you.
You know, ever since I've been here these last 2 days, I've been reading this book written by your father.
That's good, because I've always told the people, if you want to know what kind of president I will be, then look at the way my father was.
You use this as a kind of a script for the improvement of the systems in this country. Which chapters would you recommend?
The chapter that talks about the national goal, the chapter that talks about free enterprise, the chapter that talks about land reform, and the chapter that talks about the socio-economic program.
You mentioned land reforms over here. Now, I get the impression that land reforms in your country, I mean, the maldistribution of land is almost as bad as Central America, like Nicaragua, El Salvador or something. And there are 15 or 20 people controlling all the land. Is that?
Well, I would not be able to say 20 families, but certainly the land tenure system has been controlled by a few families, and that is why it is so important to institute land reform, to have asset reform, starting with land. People's
Power brought you into this house. In fact, you have been here before. You grew up in this house, didn't you?
No, I wasn't, but I was a young girl. I was 14 years old when I was living here the last time.
As president, are you sleeping in the same bedroom where you slept as a young girl?
Yes, the same. So I feel very much at home.
Right. This dynastic factor in politics, I mean, you are the second generation. Is it a very Asian thing?
Even in the U.S.,
which
you
one?
have a second generation Bush.
Oh, Bush, yes.
And you had John Adams and John Quincy Adams.
Right, right. What do you think? How do you explain it?
Well, on my part, I think it's because I learned many things from my father, and I went to school the way he wanted me to go to school, to learn what he had to learn to become president. And he left me a good name, and he imparted in me many traits that make for a good public servant, a good politician. So all of those things together made me what you would call an attractive candidate to enter politics. So that must probably be the same reason why many other second generation or even third generation, as in the case of India, right, politicians get into public office.
Anyway, so it was People's Power that brought you here. The legitimacy of your government is not questioned. Now you are embarked on economic reconstruction. Right?
Oh, yes, that is the one we're paying attention to, because as far as legitimacy is concerned, the Supreme Court has ruled I am legitimate. The two houses of Congress, which are incidentally dominated by another party, have also recognized the legitimacy. They said that fiscalizing is one thing, legitimacy is another. So while they continue to fiscalize, they recognize legitimacy. The whole world, including your country, has already recognized this government and the people themselves. The armed forces of the Philippines and the police are under my command.
No, there's no doubt about that.
Yes,
that was not
yes.
my point. Point is, are you now embarked on good economic
Yes,
growth?
correct. The legitimacy issue being put to rest, that is our main concern, because in my inaugural address when I took my oath as president, I said, when I mentioned my 4 core beliefs, I said the first one is that we must be bold in our national ambitions, and we must seek to win the battle against poverty within the decade.
But don't you think that this fears of recession in the United States, do they enable you to alter your game plan somewhat?
That's right. We must not overlook that and gloss over that, and we must do our economic planning with our eyes wide open, knowing that that is the world environment.
When you say eyes wide open, what would you recommend? Have you diagnosed that recession is upon us as far as across the Pacific?
It is much better to diagnose on the side of pessimism rather than optimism.
Yours is a fascinating country. I mean, for 400 years you've had a problem with the Muslims in the middle and further south, and you have very audaciously embarked on a program of engaging them.
Yes.
What do you hope
Laying
to
down
achieve?
of arms, peace and development in Mindanao, a
What-
recognition of our country as a multi-ethnic society.
Do you feel that these people, the Muslims, have been sinned against?
In some way, yes, yes. Well, because the development has not really reached them, especially in recent years. In terms of Human Development Index, the 5 Muslim provinces are the poorest provinces in our country, and by far behind the other provinces.
Yes, but why would you engage them not in the sovereign territory of the Philippines? Why would you engage them in another country?
Well, for one thing, when it's here and everybody else is looking over our shoulders, it's very hard to be candid. We end up talking to the media rather than to each other. We end up talking to the gallery. And you're not going to get much talking to the gallery. You're not going to get much posturing.
But your opponents will read it differently. They will read it as you're bargaining not from a position of strength, but of weakness.
My opponents will certainly look for ways to interpret it badly. That's what politics is all about. That's what the two sides are all about.
Do you see India as a countervailing factor, or are you only engaging India in sheer economic terms?
Yes, of course, because we are talking, we're talking now about globalization. We're talking now about the world getting smaller. We have regional groupings, but the regional groupings are getting larger and larger. For instance, if you talk about my region, we started with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, just 3 countries. And then we talked about ASEAN, the original ASEAN. Now ASEAN has become bigger. It is now 10. And then we talk about ASEAN plus 3. So we have our dialogue partners. So and then on the other hand, we have the APEC, which are the countries around the Pacific. So the regional groupings are getting bigger and bigger. And so India is not very far away as you talk about regional groupings.
No, you said the growing ASEAN family of 10 and 10 plus 3. 3 means China, Japan, and Korea. So don't you think it could be 10 plus 4, and India would be part of that?
It can happen.
Would you be working towards that end?
Well, we will have to, I cannot answer for my other friends in ASEAN, but we will have to see the natural turn of events, you see, because the plus 3 came about as a result of very extensive and intensive linkages between these 3 countries individually and our countries. So it was a matter of formalizing what really was.
The Indian community that you mentioned, what has been the role of the Indian community here?
When I was young, they did a lot of the retail trade, and they still do up to now. But now also, not just Indians here, but Indians from India and other parts, Indians from other parts of the world have also been investing in manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
And lately, of course, where you're famous now for information and communication technology. Now that makes India a very important part of the world, and an important part of the Philippines too, because we emulate India. Of course, we will never have the same volume of ICT work as India by your sheer population, but we would like to be like a little Bangalore as far as that's concerned.
Well, on that very optimistic note about the Indians, thank you very much.